So, as Putin's war continues to seek a Pyrrhic victory over Pokrovsk, there is something significant happening elsewhere between the Russian-Chinese relationship, and certainly not what the Kremlin would like to claim, nor would have expected. For years, Moscow has always boasted about its strategic partnership with Beijing, a relationship built on energy, trade, and the increasing shared opposition to the West. But beneath the handshakes and the photo ops, the numbers always tell a different and, in this case, much darker story. Trade is falling for the first time between these two since Putin's full-scale invasion. Chinese refiners are just dumping Russian oil en masse, and now Russia itself is so desperate for cash it's planning to issue its first ever yuan-denominated government bonds, just to plug a budget hole that's 5 times larger than forecast. So in this video, I wanted to compile these small but significant details, break down how Russia's economic lifeline on China is increasingly showing fracture, why Beijing itself is quietly distancing itself, and what this all means for Putin's war economy.
This is the Global Gambit.
How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel, where today we are looking particularly at the Russo-Sino relationship based on some recent developments. I have a bigger video coming out on the relationship between these two in the next week or so, and well, look forward to that. It's a deeper dive that I've been looking into for a while. But before getting into this one, what do you think? As always, is China going to eventually abandon Russia altogether? Is this just some developments? Or do you think that them together, as I think, can really begin to pile on the pressure even more as we enter the last quarter of the year? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll be sure to check them out. But first, let's have a look at this idea that the Russian-Sino relationship is limitless, which of course it isn't. This week, Russia's Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin has arrived in Hangzhou for a 2-day visit. The headlines are looking good. Meetings with Premier Li Qiang, a photo op with Xi Jinping, and a series of 8 cooperation deals covering things from customs, nuclear safety, but also interesting from an astropolitics kind of perspective, satellite navigation. Mishustin has reminded reporters that China remains Russia's largest trading partner and proudly declare that trade is now conducted almost entirely in national currencies, which technically it is, and that is a big deal. The share in the dollar and the euro, he said, is at the level of statistical error, meaning basically insignificant. But the statistics always hide a brutal truth, and the selective reporting, in this case, even more so. The overall volume of that trade is shrinking. According to Kommersant, trade between the two countries has dropped nearly 10% year on year in the first 9 months of 2025, the first decline since the full-scale invasion by Putin's war machine into Ukraine. Now, the reasons should be obvious: Western sanction pressure, weak domestic demand in China, and a Russian market already flooded with Chinese goods. So what once looked like economic symbiosis now looks like a dependence meeting bit of fatigue. Indeed, China itself, and why I always have an issue when we sort of congregate these 4 countries, Iran, China, North Korea and Russia together, the 3 of those you could argue are more reckless. Whilst China, yes, it has an antipathy towards the US-led system, and I made a video just on the developments of Trump and President Xi Jinping's direct meetings in Korea just a few days ago. But the point is that China still benefits from the current system, and it's never going to be as reckless or rogue, if you like, at least from a Western interpretation, as the other 3, because it has so much more to lose, and because it benefits so much from the current situation. Now, nowhere is there more fatigue clearer than in the oil trade. For nearly 2 years, China's refiners have kept Putin's economy essentially afloat, buying heavily discounted Russian crude after Europe has turned away. But now even that tide is turning. As we covered recently in another video, major Chinese refiners, Sinopec, PetroChina, and what's known as smaller teapot refineries in Shandong are backing off. Why? Well, because the US and its allies have blacklisted the top producers like Rosneft and Lukoil and sanctioned some of those Chinese buyers. These secondary sanctions are highly risky, but they do seem to be having the intended effect on these Chinese entities. The result, therefore, is 400,000 barrels a day, nearly 45% of Russia's total import, are suddenly unwanted. The equivalent prized ESPO grade of oil also has seen prices plunge as shipments have piled up unsold. Even state-owned companies are staying on the sidelines, terrified of these secondary sanctions. The smaller refiners, meanwhile, have run out of import quotas, and they're watching as one of their peers, Yulong Petrochemical, gets blacklisted by the UK and EU. That's what real-world deterrence therefore looks like, not rhetoric, but a chilling, often underreported in the eyes of the Putinists and propagandists, but does ripple through every trader's balance sheet. And if you're wondering how Beijing responds, it's with silence. The recent Trump-Xi meeting focused on chips, rare earths, and soybeans, but not a single public word on Russian oil. The omission of that, especially by China, does say everything, including where its actual loyalties lie, which are certainly not with the Russians. And again, if you find this useful, then do consider subscribing. I do enjoy hearing what you have to say in the comments, and my goal with these videos is to take a particular angle on a broader topic and drill, if it's oil we're talking about, to the bottom of it, to understand the details of this and how it plays out in geopolitics and international relations. And with my background in all those sorts of things, I hope it brings some value to you. But back to the chaos, because Moscow's money problem is just that. As Chinese demands cools and sanctions bite, Russia's finances are continuing to unravel. The finance ministry expects the federal deficit to hit 5.7 trillion rubles. That's nearly 5 times higher than was ever forecast or planned. Oil and gas revenues, though, at the same time are down 20%. Custom duties are down 19%, and value-added tax receipts are missing by over 1 trillion rubles. To fill that gap, therefore, Moscow is preparing something unprecedented: yuan-denominated government bonds, worth up to about 400 billion rubles or $5 billion, to be sold on the Moscow exchange. So this isn't just financial diversification, more an illustration of growing desperation and to look for alternatives out of that need. Russia can no longer raise money in dollars or euros. Its banking sector is cut off from global capital markets, and it's turning to Chinese currency, hoping domestic investors, including oil giants like those mentioned, will use their yuan earnings to prop up the state. But the irony with this is that those very companies are being sanctioned for the same exports that once funded the Kremlin's budget. The snake is starting to eat its own tail, in other words. And for anyone of you wondering, yes, Russia does already have about 2 billion in corporate yuan bonds circulating. But this is the first time the government itself has had to borrow in a foreign currency just to stay solvent. But meanwhile, Ukraine, of course, isn't sitting still. Overnight, Kiev's drones hit the Saratov oil refinery, one of Russia's oldest and most strategic facilities. But not just for the first time, the 4th time, just in the past couple of months. The refinery, which is owned by Rosneft, has a capacity of about 4.8 million tons a year, and these repeated hits are forcing Moscow to divert resources away, be it from the front lines, diplomatic engagement, to emphasis on protection of its domestic infrastructure, to trying to manage the storm that is increasing skepticism and concern about Russia's ability to be, immune from the war, because it is coming home. The Russian Defense Ministry has claimed that it shot down 64 drones across several oblasts, but satellite footage and local reports, including very entertaining reads on Telegram, which I highly recommend if you want a good night's sleep beforehand, tell a different story. Refineries are burning, airports are closing, and this ideological sense of invulnerability that Russia has sensed is slipping. The idea that Putin is the president that could protect and uphold Russia in the international system is always slipping further. Ukraine has learned that to strangle the war machine, you hit the oil, you hit the supply chains. It's harder to sustain a war if your coffers are empty and your overall international support is declining. And so each refinery that goes offline chips that little bit away at the revenues that keep those missiles flying. And so to sum up, on top of everything we've seen in the past few months alone, trade is unquestionably, indisputably shrinking. Chinese refiners, along with India's, are backing away. Russia's budget is imploding, and Ukraine is literally hitting Moscow where it hurts most, its entire energy heart, if you like. Putin may like to talk about multipolarism and multipolar world, but the reality is brutally simple. Russia is becoming increasingly a client state, financially chained to Beijing, strategically bled by sanctions, and militarily stretched by a war it cannot, well, not just afford, but sustain. How long can that illusion of strength last? Well, that largely depends on Putin's ability to command control over his domestic audience, over the people that have become, in a sense, almost indebted, devoted to him as if he were a neo-Tsar. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Is this just a continuation of this slow-moving car crash, or something on the stepping stone towards something perhaps more dramatic and quicker? So like a lot of people, I've always been a bit confused about, say, alternative finance, or skeptical about crypto. Now, I only hold a small amount of it myself, but I've been trying to understand the more serious, regulated side of the industry. And one platform that stood out to me is Nomi, who are kindly sponsoring today's video. They've been active since 2019, but also that they do have over 1.5 million Nomi users worldwide, 800 plus assets to earn on, but amazingly $91.3 million worth of interest paid out in the 6 years since they've been operating. They've been mentioned heavily from experts across the crypto and finance fields, both on YouTube, but also from top traders on X, and also have multiple media mentions, including from investing.com and Coinbase, meaning that they are reputable. All the legal documentation and registrations are right there. It's the level of transparency that you rarely see in this space. And what now, switching to the stakings page, where you can see things like staking, lending, launch pool tokens, and company information, you can see directly the kind of return that you're able to get. Returns currently range from 6.2 to 155% APY, depending on obviously the type of asset and term. The yields are all backed by institutional credit program using fully collateralized loans. So profits come from real lending activity, not any of that speculative tokenomics. And what I particularly like and would encourage you to also do is to experiment with different parts of the page, including the calculator. So for example, if you want to put in 10,000 on the USDT, which is pegged to the US dollar itself, then you can get a really interesting projection of what your return will be after just a few months, year, and so on. And so what I suggest you do is just explore the site, explore Nomi5 for yourself. What I'm going to do now is just show you how easy it is to set up a couple of deposits. So for example, and as you can see here, you can earn that incredible 153.8% APY. But we're just going to start a deposit, say the maximum amount of 245, and then put it on for a 12-month interest rate, and then just click continue. And so what you can see here are all the staking deposits that I've made so far. And they're all listed here, including the interest rates and deposit amounts in equivalent US dollars, for example. But the last thing I wanted to show you, very exciting, is this welcome box, which is active. So I'm going to go ahead and get whatever my reward is for being a new user. And just like that, I've received some Ethereum that has been accredited to my account. Very cool. And so if you're like me, always been slightly curious about the world of crypto, do consider looking at Nomi. This isn't financial advice, just a look at the more professional side of how this world is evolving. If you want to check it out. My name is Pyotr Kurzin. I'm a mix of Russian and English and the host of the Global Gambit. If you found this analysis insightful, then do consider supporting the channel, be it on Patreon, as a member on YouTube, or just simply subscribing and liking the video. It's very simple, but as we near 100,000 subscribers, I do really appreciate every single one of you who supports what I do and allows me to provide this analysis from as balanced perspective as I can on a daily basis. We'll see you all in the next one. Take care.